This podcast is brought to you by the Prospect Research Institute, where researchers come to learn, innovate, and connect.
The prospect research can sort of run the numbers and sort of see the patterns, and the VP of the leadership can ask these I wonder questions to try to figure out what are the differences and what are Mark and Sue doing that the other two aren't, and the team can start sharing from each other.
Welcome to Prospect Research Chat Bites, a podcast by and for prospect research professionals. I'm Jennifer Filla. Today, I'm talking with Doug Cogswell, Executive Vice President of Strategy for the Pursuant Group and President, Advisor Solutions. Hello, Doug. Thank you for joining me today on Chat Bites.
Yeah, glad to be here, Jen.
I am excited to talk to you. It was great to meet you in New York and hear about the work that you do. So, of course, I checked out your LinkedIn profile and wow, you have a lot on there. But for the most recent couple of decades, you have led Advisor Solutions and you're focused on cybersecurity and data analytics for nonprofits. So what captured and held your attention for that many years and still today with Advisor Solutions?
Yeah, Jen, great question. I mean, the world of data analytics is evolving, and what we're solving today is very different than what we were solving 2 years ago, 5 years, or 10 years ago. And to me, that's exciting. A lot of the work we do is trying to take stuff that's stored somewhere. It's not a very technical term, but stuff that's stored somewhere. It might be like click-throughs in a spreadsheet, or it might be something that's recorded in one system versus another. We bring it together and try to create useful content out of it for our clients. And that's tricky. It's a lot of new stuff, and it's thinking about data in ever new ways to solve problems. That's what gets me pumped up. I like innovating and solving new problems and bringing them out to help people.
Well, then you are definitely in the right field because data is changing everything so rapidly. It makes my head spin.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. I mean, if you look at fundraising, the ability to pinpoint the capacity, the interests, the motivations of a potential prospect today is so different than it was a few years ago. Or the ability to measure the impact of your marketing messages, whether it's a e-newsletter or if it's a mailer. I mean, there's so much more ways you can track and measure response rates and understand what's working and what not. It's really a new ballgame.
Well, and along that line of thinking, you have on your LinkedIn profile about skiing, ice hockey, water skiing, windsurfing, hiking, backpacking, kids, grandkids. So how does all that fit in with your work?
Yeah, well, you can tell from that list, I like the outdoors and I've got a lot of energy, and I like to balance a lot of things because I also do a bunch of development work in rural Africa on how to raise communities up with healthcare and education. So those data analytics, all these sports are all, they're things I just get enjoyment out of, and they motivate me. Sometimes my family might say, like, can you slow down a little bit? But I like being active. I'm the guy that goes on vacation, and sitting on a beach is not a good idea. I'm going to be out sailing or water skiing or whatever else there is to do around there, running down the beach. So that's just me.
And a great example of how interests and affinities are showing up in that digital data, because you have that right on your LinkedIn profile.
Right. And if you can mine that, I mean, so if you look at what I just said, if somebody looked at my background, they're raising money for development work in Africa or development, raising up people somewhere. Obviously, that's an interest area of mine. I'm going to be more inclined to consider that appeal than I would, obviously there's a bunch of things I probably wouldn't give to, but that's the kind of stuff you can figure out I would be more likely to give to.
Yes, for sure. And you have had all kinds of different experiences, not just how you're solving problems with the data, but also building and growing companies. And so when you look at research and data, how do you see that interacting with nonprofits doing their operations and growing their services, things like that? Do you have a bigger perspective to share?
In my experience in fundraising, there's a handful of things you need to know about your prospects. And data can inform that. I mean, obviously, so can sitting down and talking with somebody. But before you get to that point, it's a good idea to understand I guess there's sort of three core dimensions of people in the fundraising realm. Do they have capacity and how much? What is their connection, inclination, interest, engagement? And there's a bunch of words that describe it. What's their connection to your cause? And what are their interest areas? And if you know that, if those three, like a picture three circles, the intersection of them is where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck and where you're most likely to have a conversation. In my case, I'm not going to tell you my capacity, but you've got some capacity. You can figure out from public data that I like development work in Africa. And you look at organizations I'm connected to, you'll see I come to events and I click on newsletters and all those things. So all that data can be brought together to understand, in my case, what I'm interested in and where I'm spending my time today. And I don't know, that's just, it's evolved, and that's just powerful stuff that can make a big difference. And it's not easy because what I just described, the data is coming from some public sources, a bunch of databases internally. And it's not, most of that, like newsletter click-throughs, are never designed to be part of an attachment or an engagement score, but boy, they sure help, newsletter clicks. Or, if you're in the medical world, of the patient visits, you can figure all kinds of things out of that by mining and turning into useful content. So it's been motivating for me, and it's an ever evolving field that's getting more and more critical to having an effective fundraising team that ideally you want to approach your prospects in the most targeted way and raise as much money as fast at the lowest cost. You want like more money, faster, lower cost. That's the ROI of getting this right. And the data can really inform that and make a huge difference.
So when you're trying to do that, the sort of faster, better, cheaper to grow, for an organization that's ready to take the next step, whatever that next step is. So it might be that they have some people trained in major gifts and their direct response is bringing in money, and they know they want to kind of up the ante. They want to add plan giving. They know they should be probably focusing differently. They could certainly make their gift officers more efficient. How does that all play out over time? Because for someone to be able to go from not having any research solutions to fully having all the solutions, there's something in the middle that's missing. And I've seen a lot of organizations spend a lot of money purchasing data solutions and not gaining any traction. When I hear you speak, you talk a lot about dashboards, about the strategies and the metrics. What happens in between those two extremes? Like, what are the kind of milestones or journeys that you've seen organizations take to go from not doing much with data to really making it efficient, faster, better, cheaper?
Well, I think a lot of that, Jen, has to do with the team leadership and processes as much as it does with systems and actually the content. So in our best success stories, we've had a situation where the VP is on board. He's fact-based decision-making, he or she, and values that process. And then because of that, we'll lead meetings that are integrating the data with the soft side stories. Obviously, we're talking about people, and you got field officers, and you got to bring it all together. So there's a soft side, there's a kind of an art, and then there's a hard side, the data side, which is the science. And he or she is comfortable bringing that together and having these open discussions. But he or she will also ask, we call them I wonder questions. Like he or she can look at a dashboard and say, I wonder why. I mean, we create segments. So your top segment prospects, the ones with the best capacity and the most engaged and have interests in the engineering sciences. Well, he or she would look at that and say, well, how many of them aren't staffed today? And there'd be an answer. You go, well, why can't we staff more of them? What would we have to give up? So if that comes from the top, you really start getting engagement around the data, because then the team says, he or she's really interested in this, and I'm going to come to the meeting prepared. Versus if that's not the case, I've seen it often break down where the data doesn't get used, and it goes back to who knows who and all the soft side stuff. So I think first, I've been babbling a little bit here, but you need senior leadership on board. Second, you need a process that brings people together, and it's open, transparent discussions around how the data can inform assignments. It can inform, how the major giving team is working, the annual giving team, all of that. And the third thing is, you got to give it some time. These are cultural transformations, and to get results, typically we're seeing can take a year or two. And if you expect to put a new dashboard in or an analytics system with the data, and in 3 months everything's humming, it's not going to generally be the case. So summarize process, senior leadership on board, open, transparent, informed discussions with the team using the data, and patience to give it some time to play out. Typically a year or two, you'll start seeing results.
So that's going to take cash money to get that rolling. So there needs to be available money in the budget. What about internal resources? Do you see clients that have certain internal resources to help facilitate all that? Like who's in charge of running those dashboards? Are you providing that service ongoing, or how does that work?
We're very big on empowering the client team. So, let's focus on major giving for a minute. Prospect research ought to be able to do the analytics, ought to be able to run the dashboards, and they ought to be you shouldn't need a PhD in statistics to do this. You might want to have a data scientist on the team to help. The prospect researchers are the ones, and if they become like partners with the gift officers, so the gift officer has some questions, they sit down together, and under the auspices of the VP who's helping to drive this, they become like confidants. And I've seen that work really well. And that's a much more powerful solution where you've got the internal teams really connecting around it versus some outside consultant or some outside vendor like us comes in and does this for you. Much better to have the internal team. Similarly, on the annual giving side, typically annual giving teams are a little more streamlined and tend to be a little more analytical. It's a major giving team. We typically have this prospect research gift officer collaboration probably needs to be fostered a bit more, but we've seen it work great, and it really brings the whole team up.
Probably starts to change the dynamics among team members because they're collaborating in a whole new way.
Totally. And that's critical.
I've really seen organizations struggle when there isn't prospect research staff. So they want to take that next step. Maybe the VP comes in, doesn't really understand what it really takes to use data effectively. And you can't just purchase it and presto, you're running. There's this ongoing tweaking. Is that what you mean when you talk about empowering the researchers? Like they can't just set it and it runs on autopilot. What do they have to be able to do to make a tool like yours really sing year after year?
Well, sort of stick with major giving for a minute. I mean, you've got the whole prospect assignment side of it. Like go back to those segment A1 prospects, the ones that have the high capacity and are heavily engaged in newsletter clicks and coming to events, whatever, and have an interest in engineering because we're trying to raise money for that campaign. Making sure you've got the right prospects in the portfolio and understanding the data behind the numbers is like step one. But then step two is, okay, now these prospects are assigned. Somebody needs to be managing the process to say, are the gift officers connecting with them in a reasonable way in 6 months or a year, or are they not? Are they connecting with 10% of their portfolios, 50%, 80%? And are they moving through prospect stages at a reasonable rate? So that's another place where the VP with prospect research and gift officers can look at like portfolios and say, here's some best practices. Mary and Joe are doing a great job of clearing through the qualification stage and moving into early solicitation. Mark and Sue are doing a great job. They're not actually qualifying as well. I wonder what's going on there, but they're doing a great job of moving, from mature cell cultivation to solicitation. And the prospect research can sort of run the numbers and sort of see the patterns. And the VP of the leadership can ask these I wonder questions to try to figure out what are the differences and what are Mark and Sue doing that the other two aren't. And the team can start sharing from each other. So that's a sort of a combination of the process and the data informing the team so that people are learning from each other and doing better. And that's ongoing. I mean, that's the portfolios are going to keep shifting as they get met with and you learn about, hey, the data said this, but this isn't quite the case, or turns out maybe Mary's not so good at qualification and should be, stay at just the later stages. And maybe somebody's really good at qualification, but not at the later stages. Then you can shift the roles around. So as you start seeing the data, and if it's this collaborative, open process, you can start making these shifts, and then the whole team will perform better, and you can get people more focused on roles they're actually good at. The data can really help get behind that. And that's the kind of stuff that's in the systems. It's just usually hidden in the systems. It needs to be brought out in a way that it can be used to inform these discussions.
And visual.
Right, because we're on a podcast, but if I could show some charts, I could show you some charts that just highlight two people are doing really well here, but not so well here. Let's talk about it. And you should focus on what they're doing really well and get those stories out.
I love that. So that's why that leadership is so important, because establishing that culture of sharing without feeling like you're being punished necessarily. We have to find out why things are happening, asking those why questions without blaming or shaming along the way.
Right. And that why, or we call it the I wonder question. Like, that's a great question because it's not threatening. It's just, I wonder why this looks like this. I wonder why this other thing looks different than that, and it gets
So
people talking.
before I let you go, I'm
Huh.
wondering if you have some resource, a book, a leader you follow, experience, something that deeply influenced you in your career that you'd be willing to share.
That's kind of a loaded question.
Especially for an active person.
Well, I do read books sometimes. Yeah, I do read books. There's a book. So I went to Harvard Business School for grad school, and there's a book by one of the professors called The Innovator's Dilemma. It's by Clay Christensen. It's kind of a pillar book in the business world. And The Innovator's Dilemma is about change, and it's about companies that are leading in what they do, but then something new comes along. It's very hard for them to pick up on this something new because they're kind of all excited about what's working right now, and they don't want to like dilute that, but they need to because this new thing can grow and take them out, or the new things coming in don't have much market share, don't have much visibility. How in the world do you get the market share? And it's that tension, but the concepts, it's growing businesses, but they fit everywhere. You can see this in the fundraising world. I mean, you've got to continue to evaluate your processes, your people, and what's working and what's not. And you may have done something one way for a long time, but the game's changed, right? And then, for example, today, or the last couple of years, doing visits hasn't been so easy. So the game needed to change. And actually, what we found out is that in many cases, a phone call or an online meeting can be more effective than a visit. Well, that's a game changer. And then we ought to look at visits differently than we did in the past. In fact, we just did some research that if you try to do visits in the solicitation stages with busy people, most of those busy people don't want to visit with a field officer. You can clear the solicitation close issues on the phone or with email, and it's just a lot easier. So we actually learned from COVID, there's new ways of doing things, and that's what this innovator's dilemma is about, is how do you actually get leadership and the team to change to the new reality. Cool book. I recommend everybody read it. Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen, a Harvard Business School professor.
That sounds fabulous. I need to get that on my list. Thank you so much for sharing today. I really appreciate it, Doug.
Well, cool. Yeah, if anybody wants to talk more, let's go skiing together.
Exactly. Or in my case, water skiing.
Right. That's an easy way to get a dialogue going. And the good news about skiing, you get to sit on chairlifts together and have conversations.
That's wonderful. That was Doug Cogswell, Executive Vice President Strategy for the Pursuant Group and President, Advisor Solutions. Were you surprised that Doug didn't go on more about reports and data collection? I was. Instead, he talked about data-driven as being led by the I wonder questions. And now that he said it, it does make sense that if leadership is naturally questioning the data being presented, being data-driven becomes possible. Hey, if you enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come check out the Prospect Research Institute's learning community. It's a membership community with powerful resources, great discussions, and comprehensive courses. Check it out at member.prospectresearchinstitute.org. I'd love to have you join me as a member of the learning community. See you there.